everybody, and welcome to episode 18 of OTTB on Tap. I'm Niamh.
And I'm Emily. Niamh, what's on tap this week?
This week, we're going to talk about a really cool OTTB I had named Scout, who I got just after he came off the track, and I brought him along with the help of many people over 5 years. He ultimately allowed me the opportunity to buy my dream horse, Gem, that I have now, and I think his story is just a great example of how to create the athlete you wish you could afford.
So let's get into what was going on around the time that you acquired Scout.
So I had been working for your business as a working student for a while, and I had a project horse at the time, a little 15-2 thoroughbred. He was super cool, but extremely athletic, and honestly wasn't really well suited for me at the time because as a working student, your personal horses tend to take a little bit of a backseat with your job responsibilities. But we were able to connect him with a super young rider who has taken him on to great heights in the eventing world, and hopefully we'll get to have her on at some point. But I hadn't planned to sell him until one fateful day.
Oh, yeah, the infamous sale video. So part of what you would do when you were working for me was ride in a lot of the sale videos. I'm super tall, for those of you that haven't met me in person, but I'm almost 5'11". And it can really present something of a better picture sometimes to have a smaller rider on a horse, even though Scout was quite tall. It just kind of helps them picture themselves a little bit more if you have an average height rider. So anyway, we put you up on Scout for his sales video. And kind of interestingly, he had stuck around a little bit longer than we thought he would. I mean, he was nearly 17 hands, bay, nice moving. I think he had a small amount of white on him and just a total sweetheart type of a horse. But for whatever reason, he wasn't getting a lot of action. I think everyone was pulled towards, we had this even bigger dark bay mare at the time that everybody wanted. So they'd come out to try him and then they'd see her and then it would just go downhill. So anyway, I think it was your very first time riding him.
Yeah.
And usually, if you've never made a sale video of a horse, particularly a green thoroughbred, we would try to have the horse walk, trot, canter in both directions, have it be fairly short, show off the gaits. But when you're on a super green horse that maybe you've never ridden before, maybe you've ridden a couple times, it can take a lot of takes to get that everything just right. You know, you get the wrong lead, etc. And sometimes we throw in a little jump or two at the end. But Niamh, you started the normal pattern around the ring that we used to do. And lo and behold, we actually got the sale video in one continuous take. And I was thinking in my little devious brain, like, Niamh seems to really like this horse. But when you pulled up, you had just the biggest smile on your face. And I was like, this is really the happiest I've seen you on a horse.
Yeah, it was pretty magical, but you know, he was actively for sale. And at the time I had my little project horse who had been let down and I'd put a basic restart on. But I was pretty smitten with this horse that was on paper all wrong for me. I'm 5'6" and change, and he was 16'3" at the time, a really big mover. And even though my 15-2 off the track thoroughbred seemed more suitable, something in my gut said, sell him and keep Scout. So that's what happened.
And he was just turning 4 at the time. What were your impressions about him?
Well, this is kind of a funny story because every time we got a new horse, and we had a Hitchcock pen, which it's kind of like a round pen with like another round pen around it. So the horse can go on a track around you and lunge freely or free jump or whatever. And we would always make these videos of them when they would first come in this enclosed environment. And we let him loose and he showed off and was extremely fancy. And we have a video of me turning and looking at Emily with the lunge whip in my hand saying, aren't you glad I don't own half of this one? So joke's on me, because that's called getting high on your own supply, guys.
Yeah, so I owned him outright. Something that we used to do also is partner on sale horses. So it was a way for me to get a little extra cash to buy the horse and Niamh to get cash on the back end because we would sell them and then she would get half of the sale, or I can't remember how we worked it out. But
yeah,
so we'd partnered on a bunch of horses, which worked out pretty well for us. But then I decided to buy this one in particular outright. So Niamh didn't even have a 50% claim to
Yeah, exactly. So my first impressions of him were worked with a farm down in Maryland that we got quite a few horses from, a really fantastic racing group that would retire their horses. And we would go down and we'd look at them, and then we'd either send a shipper or we'd ship a couple of horses back up. And they rested all of their horses when they came off the track, regardless of if they had any acute injuries or anything like that. So he had been on stall rest for a little bit along with the others, and they pull him out into the aisle, and he was massive. He was as tall as he was long, and he was just such a sweetie pie. I actually think I have a picture of him just burying his head into my chest. So he was a really sweet horse. Other really incredible thing is that we get him home and we take the standard confirmation shots that we took of all the horses. And we had this big white door to our barn at the time that we would take pictures of. So the horse would really stand off against the background. And this horse is the epitome of why we always say you have to have a good imagination when looking at young thoroughbreds, especially when they're right off the track. So he had lost a little bit of his condition, and he was just all sharp angles and legs. But you could see that there was just so much quality there. And I'll definitely post pictures of before and afters of him, because he was really an impressive one for sure.
Yeah, he was. I remember taking that picture, and it definitely is one where you can see all the angles there. And I mean, if you know what you're looking for, you can tell that he was really good raw material. But yeah, we'll definitely post that picture and or a lot of pictures with this episode on the website. So I know a lot transpired the first year that you had him. Can you kind of talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so I spent the rest of the spring and summer working for you and then also riding him as well. He was just really fun to bring along. He was really straightforward. He was very, very kind. Despite being so big and big moving, he just kind of packed me around. He was just one of those horses that you could tell whoever trained him at the track did a beautiful job with him. Everything that we tried to do with him, he took really well to. In fact, at one point, Emily's mom came for a visit. Hi, Emily's mom. And came for a visit with her stepdad, and we threw a Western saddle on him, and they rode him around the farm. So we started hacking out and jumping logs and doing things like that. And then he got in a fairly significant cellulitis at the end of that summer. So I decided to move him closer to where I was living in Philly. I was wrapping up being a working student. And so he was just over the bridge in South Jersey, which for those not from this area, Philly is a tough place to have horses, but you can keep horses in South Jersey or west of the city pretty easily within under an hour, basically.
You had bought him, right, and sold the other horse. I think we kind of skipped over that part.
Yeah.
So we worked out a deal between us, and Scout became yours, and then the other horse went on to a new rider. We put him up for sale. I think he sold. I don't even think we ever put an ad out for him. I think he just got sold.
Yeah, I think a couple of people tried him, and it was just a perfect match with the girl that bought him. So then I'm over at this farm by myself and really leaning on everything I learned being a working student.
Can you explain a little bit more about that? Like, what did you learn and how did you use it?
Well, I was unfortunately in a position of being the most experienced person at that barn. It was a small facility with like a little ring and some hacking and stuff like that. But I was trailering for the first time by myself. I'm wrapping my horse's leg every day. I'm medicating him. I was on my own. And, you know, I feel like that first encounter of relying on all the stuff you've learned is a little bit intimidating at first. But anyways, he got over his bout of cellulitis and we started working with an event rider nearby, and I took lessons and she did some training rides on him.
Why did you decide to get some training rides?
Well, I'm a big believer in getting perspectives from people that are way more accomplished than me. And I feel like if someone's going to try to teach you on a green horse, they should at the very least have a feel of that horse. And I don't think there's any way to do that without actually riding the horse. And the trainer really liked him and she gave me some really fantastic advice early on.
Yeah, it's hard to find a good trainer that has the ability to kind of really connect with a young horse. So what kind of advice did they have for you?
Well, she mostly did flat work with him, but she did jump him occasionally, and it was right after she first jumped him, and she said, quote, "Don't get greedy. He's nice. He's got the brains and the talent, but it would be easy to do too much too quickly. Go slow."
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's so important, and something that we say a lot is when you get that generous, kind, very talented young horse who's still developing in their body and still growing, is so easy to get greedy and push them too far, do too much with them. They can get sore, they can get sour, you can overface them so easily. So sometimes taking that step back is really the best thing to do and just give them time to catch up to where they are.
Yeah, it really stuck out in my mind for a long time. Well, so fast forward to a few months later, and my boyfriend and I had purchased a home in Media, PA, in the western suburbs of Philly. So I was now so much closer to Chester County, which is where I wanted to be. And I was able to keep Scout just down the road from my house. This was early 2018, and Scout was 5. And he started to show some signs that I needed additional help. And I reached out to a friend of mine who had just branched out as a pro.
What sort of signs were you seeing that made you think that you needed some professional training or help with him?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, he was a big, rangy horse, and he found it so much easier to go around on his forehand, just kind of pulling himself along with these big gaits. And when you asked him to collect and step under himself, he really struggled. He was conformationally pretty correct, but if I had to fault him, I'd say he was a little long. He could have been a little more short coupled than he was, and things would have been a little bit easier for him. But, I feel like I'm a decent rider. I like riding green horses. I think I have a good way with them. I can teach them to walk, trot, canter, do some baby lateral work, teach them how to go on the bit, get them over their first couple of jumps. But beyond that, I really want the building blocks of training to be really rock solid. And he was so athletic and had such a good attitude. But he was like a big ball of clay waiting to be molded into an event horse, and I really wanted it to be done right.
So what happened next?
Yeah, so this young pro did a lot of the big firsts with him. So first time jumping colored filler in an indoor, first cross country schoolings, where we found that Scout had a certain threshold for things.
Like what? That sounds a little bit ominous.
Well, we found out that even though he was very willing, he was an internalizer, which I think a lot of thoroughbreds are. And when he didn't understand something or if he felt trapped, he really struggled. So we learned that over time, if we broke things down for him and made him feel really confident, it would end up creating a lot of boldness in him. And that's how we started to approach things that were tough for him, like water and ditches, which he gave us a lot of signals that was just too much for him. And so my homework was to just get him as much exposure as I could. So I took him paper chasing and things like that. And I was lessoning nearby as well. And the paper chasing was really helpful because 1, he was off property, and 2, you're always going to have to deal with water crossings. And there was definitely one paper chase where there were 5 water crossings and I had to get off at 3 of them and somehow get back onto my 17-hand horse in the middle of nowhere.
Did you have to lead him through the water and get all wet on top of that?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. It was soggy.
Super fun.
One of them was like a river that was like above my knees.
And then you moved him again, right? After that, what's with all these moves? Was it just hard being a boarder after so many years of actually helping run the barn and take care of the horses yourself?
Yeah, it was a huge transition. And some of it was the care up to what I expected. I don't think that I'm a high maintenance boarder by any means, but there's a certain level of care and horsemanship that I expect. And I just needed to feel like he was in a place where the basics were being covered, which sounds simple, but yeah, it's a struggle. When you've done it yourself and you've run a barn, it's hard to hand off all of the responsibility to somebody else. And you can get easily frustrated by things that get missed. But we moved to a friend's farm, which is primarily a hunter jumper facility, and Scott was super happy there. So the first couple of days he was there, he apparently trotted up to and jumped over a 4'6" hot wire fence twice. And the barn manager said, maybe this horse is destined for more than your lower level goals. I had no idea he had that kind of scope in there, but that farm had an indoor, which was awesome, but that fall was incredibly wet. And I think we were stuck in that indoor for 3 months. And he started to get really hard to ride. I think
Hmm.
he felt quite claustrophobic in there. I mean, his canter stride was so big at that time that, I mean, I could barely canter him around that ring. He just felt like the walls were closing in on him. And he started to get pretty opinionated about my right leg. There was a lot of kicking out with his right hind foot over my shoulder and things like that. So I started to think about maybe putting him into a little training boot camp, because I had a trip planned to Wellington for about 10 days at the end of December. And so I reached out to an upper level rider that was recommended to me. She was supposed to have him for 10 days. So I dropped him off, and then I was leaving 2 days later for Florida.
Okay. And then that's when she called you, right? There was something she called you about. I think I was out of the country and unavailable for emotional support at the time.
Yeah, well, I feel like anytime a trainer calls you and doesn't text you, you're like, oh my God, what did my horse do?
So what did she tell you?
So she says, your horse is fine. I spent all day yesterday getting him to accept my right leg, which we had a breakthrough of. And I was like, I'm sorry. But she knew it was an issue that I wanted to have her address. And then she said, and I jumped him today, and I'm pretty sure he could be going prelim in a year. And she offered something that was kind of incredible, which was that she was going to take him to Ocala for 3 months and train him, and I would just cover his hard expenses. And yeah, like I said, Emily was out of the country. I think she was on an island somewhere with her brother and his family, unreachable. I was like, well, how do I make this decision on my own? The thought of sending my horse away for 3 months was bananas, but I thought it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up.
I should mention too, I feel like your feelings for Scout were different than any other horse up to this point. Like,
Yeah.
you worried about him. You would like feel his pain. He was definitely like a heart horse to you. So for you to just send him away where you would not see him for 3 months was kind of unthinkable.
Oh, yeah, it really was. Because at that point, I mean, he was everything that I wanted, but we were at that age where I think he was going into his 6th year. And I think that that's when the training with young thoroughbreds can get really hard. The opinions start to come out, and they start to get feeling really good in their bodies. And I was definitely leaning on the experts around me. And it was just a really hard decision. I was so excited that someone saw such potential in my horse. And I knew that what I was doing with him was only scratching the surface of his abilities, but I don't think I really had a good appreciation for what a professional would feel when they rode him. And I mean, what it came down to was this, and this is something that I really encourage people to do with their horses. I think some of it came from doing work for a rescue organization and seeing useful horses ending up in dire straits. But I'm convinced that if you can create value in a horse, they're less likely to end up in a bad situation. So like with Scout, even though I had lower level goals, I figured that getting him experience at a few levels higher would make him really valuable. So like maybe there would be a time in my life where I needed a break, or, you know, I wanted to lease him out or something. I just felt like having a horse with more experience would mean that he'd always have a soft landing, so to speak. So for me, it was just a win-win.
Yeah, I've always felt that the more versatile you can make the horse, the more people it can appeal to, the better the chances that it will have a good life and not end up somewhere that it shouldn't. So
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And I was going to say, mentioned he's going into his 6th year, and I feel like it's not particularly one year or another, but I've had the experience, and I think a lot of other people have too, and it sounds like you did, that, for instance, I bought a really lovely 4-year-old many years ago, and I took him to his first couple of events. I don't think he'd even cross-country schooled, and he jumped all the jumps, and he was just so quiet and willing and big, and, you know, he was really strung out at the canter, but he was just willing, and so it was fine. And then he turned 5, and then it was like, who's this monster? You know, so we had some growing pains there. I think there's usually a year of their life that can be quite tough, where they start to challenge you. They get their own opinions. I don't know if it's a rebellious teenager or something like that, but even the best mannered horse can change. And that's something that you really need to keep in mind when you buy a nice young prospect.
Yeah, and he was going through a big growth spurt as well. I think when I got him, he was like 16.2, 16.3, and he was well over 17 hands when I think I stopped putting a stick on him at some point. But he was big bodied and had all this musculature and top line. And so I thought the timing was super good for him to go south.
And had he competed or evented or been to any shows up until that point?
When he was in South Jersey, I did take him to an overnight dressage show, and he was super good. So that was actually the only time I ever took him to a show. So yeah, this was his first time actually going and properly eventing. So he did his very first event that winter at Majestic Oaks in Ocala, and he competed at novice and came in third. He had a really good dressage score. He loves cross country, and he came home after that stint in Ocala. And I decided to keep him in training because he was going so well, but I was also lucky enough that I could take lessons on him with the same trainer, and I could hack him out and do conditioning rides and things like that. So he did a couple more novices, and then he moved up to training at the end of the summer. And this is kind of a cool story because his first training was with another pro friend of mine that had to catch ride him because my trainer had gotten injured. And she jumped him, I think, one time and then took him around his first training course. And she was just beaming coming off the training cross-country course with him. It was at the Horse Park of New Jersey, and it was their championship course. And I remember showing you a video of him going through the water where it was like a log down a bank up to like a skinny that was on a mound in the middle of the water, and back into the water, and then out over another skinny. And you were like, that's like a prelim question all day.
Yeah, it was shocking.
So you could tell that he was green, but he just kept going.
Yeah, he kept picking up his legs and putting them down and asking the questions, but answering them too, which was really cool to see.
He did his first training, and then he ended up going back to Ocala again the following winter.
Which was 2020.
Yeah. So we all know what happened in 2020. The pandemic cut that trip really short. Actually, kind of a funny story is we were all freaking out up here in PA, but I think for people that lived in Florida, the pandemic was a real slow burn because talking to anybody that lived down there, they were like, no, we can still get toilet paper. What are you guys talking about? And we were like, yeah, well, you might want to bring some of that back in your trailer when you come back up north.
I know. We were stockpiling toilet paper. I remember I was back living in Philly at the time, and my roommate was in New Zealand on a trip, like trip of a lifetime, right? She went to New Zealand for 3 weeks. And I remember before she left, I was like, are you worried about this COVID thing? And she was like, no, it'll be fine. Well, they just spend the last week of their trip, I think, like quarantined in a hotel room that they were not allowed to leave.
Oh my God.
In New Zealand. But anyway, I don't know if she was texting me or emailing me, but she was like, do we have any toilet paper? How much toilet paper is there? You know, so she's
going to bring some home and like in her carry-on.
It was definitely a situation. Anyway.
Yeah. But the whole world shut down. You weren't supposed to be driving. The whole situation was just really bad. And he was at this point over an hour from where I lived. And my trainer just found out that she was pregnant. And so midsummer, I made a decision to pull him out of training, and I moved him to this incredible farm in Chester County, pretty close to home. It was about half the distance.
I remember that because I had left riding. I was done with riding, right? And then I took a couple of years and went on some amazing trips. And then I returned from South America, and I was sitting in the Miami airport on a layover, and I saw an ad from after the races with an OTTB, and I sent it to you, and that was it. So I actually, at the same time, I'd bought that horse and had started riding at the same farm as Niamh, and we ended up both moving to the same farm in Chester County. It was just a lot closer and easier. But yeah, what a weird time. We used to schedule our time at the barn with this online scheduling app, wear masks while we were riding. I mean, really,
it was wild.
In the middle of summer. Yeah, it was definitely pretty wild. But I think horses also helped keep us sane because it was a place where you could go and be outside and do some sort of activity, and whatever your comfort level was. I mean, when you're on a horse, you're never actually that close to somebody, you know? So if you're worried about getting sick, it's pretty easy to social distance on horseback. So I think it, for both of us, really was a good mental health break to be able to ride.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I don't know what I would have done if I wasn't able to ride. So I was lucky. I was able to go ride, and I had this wonderfully trained horse now. He was just super fun, reliable. And the farm that we moved him to, I mean, was pretty imposing. You have to hack about 10 minutes to get to the ring. It's very wide open spaces, but he was just very, very trustworthy. And I could pop him over the little cross country jumps. But I still wasn't really inspired to actually start competing or anything.
Right. And I think competitions had pretty much ground to a halt during this time that we were kind of riding and moving to a new farm yet again. But later that year, you teamed up with an amateur that was looking for a horse that she wanted extra like jumping experience, right?
Yeah. So our good friend, Nikki Shearer, she is actually the equine eye surgeon at
Shout
New
out to
Bolton Center.
Nikki.
Hi, Nikki. We know you listen to the podcast.
We love
Also, hi,
you.
hi Rex. She was looking to get a little more time jumping. She just had one competition horse at the time, and she wanted to hone her eye a little bit. So I started trailering him over to her farm for lessons, and he got to work on his weakest phase. And again, another win-win situation for me.
By weakest phase, can you give us a little bit more background on that?
Yeah, he had an enormous stride. His canter stride was wicked, and he could jump fantastic from the gallop, which is why he had such a great cross country record. And I think with a pro in the tack, they can really sort of, I'd say, muscle the horse to do the things they want to do is maybe a little strong of a word, but I think you get the idea. They can really get it done. They can compress the horse. They have a way with their leg and their hand where they can kind of do a lot more than I can ever do.
Well, also, I think, too, not to put down amateurs, but when you're a pro and you're jumping many horses a day in and day out, your eye is just going to be better than most amateurs that have one horse that maybe they jump once or twice a week. So I think there's that advantage, too, of being able to identify the perfect place to jump a jump from and being able to physically put the horse's legs there in order to take off the appropriate spot.
I feel like when you watch a pro ride a green horse, sometimes it almost looks like the pro is picking the horse up and carrying it over the fence.
Right.
That's not an insult. That's like, it's a beautiful thing when you see these incredible professionals that are literally just being like, no, I got you. You know, that's not something I'm ever going to be able to do. So,
right.
But it was really eye-opening having Nikki ride him because she's about the same height as me, maybe a touch shorter. And so it was really useful to see her working with how to compress his stride and keep him in uphill balance, because once he was in that place, he would jump really successfully.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mention her height because, as we talked about earlier in the episode, there's a pretty big height discrepancy between you and I. And I do feel like it is maybe something that's overlooked, but I think it's somewhat important to have your trainer and you potentially be roughly the same kind of height. I mean, if you just think about it from the perspective of the horse and the aids that they're getting and where your leg lies and maybe your strength, I think it's helpful to have that, whether it's in a trainer or an additional rider. It helps just give that better feedback. So eventually Nikki started competing him, and she even ended up taking him to Aiken, right?
Yeah, they began competing around at some jumper shows and events, and they had some really good outings together. Then he went to Aiken with her in January of 2022, and the more training he got, the better he got, and he was really coming into his own now. He was this pretty formidable on the flat and a cross-country machine.
Was he maybe a bit cocky at this point?
Yeah, very much so. This is the tricky thing about young horses, right? Like they can start off so easy and straightforward. And now he was 9 years old. He was easily 17 hands, fit. There were occasional theatrics thrown in and spooking just for fun. And I got to appreciate some of that when he was home with me, but it was never mean-spirited, just feel good kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this to you before, but I remember my advanced horse, Alex, he never spooked at anything. He was so, like, for all of his difficulties and quirks and weirdness, he never spooked. You could hack him out on the buckle and know that whatever came his way he wasn't going to care about until he started running advanced. And then he just would, I also couldn't catch him anymore in the field. Could not catch him. He's like, I'm an advanced horse now. I'd have to lure him into the barn and shut the door behind him. But he also became very spooky just for fun. So
yeah,
horses, they like to keep you on your toes.
Yeah.
So anyway, was it around this time, you get him home, he's 9 years old, he's a bit theatrical, he's a big, powerful, like scopy horse. Did you decide to sell him at this point? I know that wouldn't have been an easy decision for you.
Yeah, at that point I hadn't made the decision yet, though. There were some signs that maybe it was time for him to find somebody who was better suited to him. My barn manager at the time would do some training rides on him, or just some rides when I couldn't make it out to the barn. And she said, I really trust him, but man, if he ever grabbed the bit and ran, there'd be nothing you could do to stop him.
Right.
Or Nikki would come over and they'd go out hacking together, and he would be trying to buck her off for the first 10 minutes of the ride, which nobody would tell me about.
Right.
So
do you feel like he knew the difference between you and Nikki, or a rider that wanted to do more?
100%.
Yeah.
I think that was what made him really special, is that he was always so kind with me. Even when he got puffed up about something, he never like made me feel unsafe or anything like that. But so while my horse had been away, I was leasing something to ride at our farm. And then I had also purchased a couple of project ponies over the last year or two. And I actually started jumping again. One of them, a little 14 one-hand chestnut mare, got me jumping and going to clinics and things. And I started to get a little FOMO, around my barn friends. I was going to their events and going to their cross-country schoolings, and I kind of got the itch to want to compete again, or maybe just go and do some stuff, like show off what I've been working on or whatever. And I had a little bit of a meltdown one day. I was riding one of the ponies that I had gotten, and we kind of butted heads a little bit. And I just burst into tears, and my barn manager's just looking at me like, oh boy. And I was just like, I'm just frustrated. This is fun for me. I love bringing green horses along. I really like doing this. I have this beautifully trained, gorgeous thoroughbred that everybody comments on, and I'm just not good enough to ride him. I'm not good enough to take him to an event, and it was just kind of in that moment where I thought, well, I think he's pretty valuable at this stage. What if I did sell him? What kind of money would that bring? And what could that money buy me? Mm-hmm. I had invested so much into his training and bringing him along properly that I thought maybe this was the time. But at the same time, I didn't realize it, but Nikki was about to move her horse up to a higher level, and she's got a crazy schedule. She's works harder than literally anybody I know. And it was going to be too tough for her to have two horses to keep fit at that time. So we kind of all came to this decision together that this was the time. I think Nikki had done a couple of training events on him. He was just in the best shape of his life, and it was the right time to do it. I really felt like he was going to help somebody else achieve their dreams. And so we decided to put him up for sale.
And how long was he on the market for when she made this decision?
At the time, it felt like a long time, but when I was looking back at my records, it really was not that long. I think he was on the market for less than 2 months. But at the time, I had actually bought the horse I have now, Gem, and I still had a project pony. So I had 3 horses at one point for a couple of weeks, which was way more than I wanted to be dealing with.
Yeah. Pretty stressful.
The cool thing about him was that he was the type of horse that a good Ami could go out and maybe do young riders with, or a pro could have taken him up the levels. And so I thought that really put him in a sweet spot of the market. But he's now with an incredible rider in Area 1, and she sends me updates quite frequently. She said that at her first event, she almost forgot to salute the judge because she was having so much fun in dressage, and she's never experienced that before. And then she has a teenage daughter who also events, and she's really excited for him to be her daughter's packer in a couple of years when he wants to do a little bit of a step down job. So
that's great. I mean, it sounds like just such a perfect home for him. And I'm sure it was bittersweet, obviously. You know, you had this horse for many years and cared about him and had invested so much into him. But now you had the money to go buy something for yourself.
Exactly. And I did feel a sense of relief when he found the right person. The person that ended up buying him was connected to other people that I know. So it wasn't a complete stranger, which he still remains as one of the fanciest horses I've ever ridden. To this day, the kind of horse that everybody noticed. He was so kind with me. But like we were saying before, he could be really fresh with more experienced riders, but he always took care of me. And yeah, I was now in a position where I could actually go out and find my dream horse. And from the 5 years with him, I really started to understand what I was looking for in a competitive partner for me. So,
yeah. On the flip side, I feel like sometimes there is a bit of a stigma about selling a personal horse. How do you respond to that?
This can be a little bit polarizing for some people. I think there's definitely a stigma about it. I think there's a couple of takeaways from my story that could apply to many people. One is that it's always okay to sell your horse and move on to something more suitable. If you feel like you're not progressing the way that you want to, sometimes it's you, sometimes the horse is just not a good match, and sometimes you're just not meshing. I found that as my horse got fitter and stronger, he just became really too physical of a ride for me and more than what I wanted to have. And that's a really difficult pill to swallow. It's incredibly hard on your ego. And number two, I really support people getting help for their horses, whether it's a training ride here or there or putting your horse into a serious training situation. No one's going to think less of you for not doing it all yourself. And I think your horse will thank you as well. I like to say that I got a training modified horse that I just paid for over 5 years. It was like a layaway program to get a super nice horse, you know, all while being a part of his journey and getting to enjoy riding him the whole time.
So I would like to add too, in terms of selling your personal horse, where I know that there is the camp of people that believe that you make this commitment and you can't protect them once you no longer own them, right? You know, no matter what contract you sign, no matter what documentation you have, the owner of that horse can do what they want with it, fortunately or unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I think, though, that we spend a lot of time and a lot of money doing this sport. And you should really have a horse that you enjoy, you feel safe on, and that matches where you're at and what you want to do. And I think that's very, very important.
No, I really know what you're saying, because after selling Scout, I was able to buy a horse for myself. Like I said, this horse is literally everything I've ever wanted in a partner. It's hard to describe, but anybody who knows me personally or has seen me with this horse knows that this is a special connection. When I bought him, he was just on paper all of the things that I was looking for. He was small, short coupled, had experience, you know, just easy in a lot of ways. But I've become pretty emotionally bonded to this horse in a way that is kind of undefinable as I sit under his shrine in my little podcast studio. And I never knew what it was like to have that experience of, gosh, I just get to enjoy this. I can still sit on green horses if I want to, but now I have a horse where he suits my lifestyle. He suits my ambitions. He suits my goals. And he's super fun. And is he the fanciest horse in the barn? No, but I've also gotten some of my very best dressage scores of my entire life on him.
Yes. So you played the long con, the many-year long con on how to be able to afford your dream horse.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us again, everybody. If you liked what you heard today, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Also, follow us on Instagram at OTTB_on_tap. And we're also on all the other socials as OTTB on tap. If you want to, please reach out to us with interview candidates or topics or suggestions. You can contact us through our website and see lots of bonus pictures and videos and things at www.ottbontap.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Bye.